Hello and welcome. My name is Harold Offey. I'm an artist and a lecturer at Leeds Beckett University. Welcome to today's Inside Out lecture, which is brought to you in partnership between Leeds Beckett University and Leeds Art Gallery. It's part of an ongoing series of Inside Out lectures that aims to bring the best minds of a generation to inspire and support the work of our students and staff across Leeds School of Arts at Leeds Beckett University. And we've been very happy and excited to invite a number of renowned speakers, artists, thinkers from across the world to not only contribute to the creative life of the university and the art school, but also the cultural life of Leeds. And as such, this lecture series is open to the general public, and we're very happy to have hopefully a number of you joining us today. Today's talk, I'm very excited to say, will be with Otobong Nkanga, and she will be in conversation with Eleanor Morgan, Head of Programme at MIMA, and they'll both be in conversation on the occasion of Otobong's exhibition, which is currently on at MIMA, well, due to open again, and was developed in partnership with Tates and Ives. So I'll just give a very brief introduction, and then Otobong and Eleanor will start. Otobong Nkanga prompts us to think about our relationship to land and extraction of the world's natural resources. Her multidisciplinary practice spans tapestries, drawings, photographs, installations, videos, and performances that reflect on the environment and global systems of production and consumption. Her recent exhibition, From Where I Stand, explores the politics of land and its relationship to the body, histories of land acquisition and exploitation. From Where I Stand was initiated and curated by Anne Barlow, director of Tates and Ives, and it's been represented by MIMA, that's the Middlesbrough Institute of Modern Art, and the MIMA team. And I have to say, I'm a huge personal fan of Otobong's, and I had the pleasure of seeing witnessing a lot of her performances and talks. I went to a talk at Tate Modern a good few years ago, so we're in for a treat. So Otobong will be in conversation with Eleanor Morgan. Eleanor is Head of Programme at MIMA, Middlesbrough Institute of Art, and has been since 2008. She has curated residencies, exhibitions, public and education programmes across the UK, working with institutions in Norwich, Cambridge, Birmingham, and on her own independent projects. She's led and supported public art projects and developed freelance projects. She co-edited The Constituent Museum, a reader on how arts institutions might work differently with their publics. I'm going to shut up and excitedly hand over to Otobong and Eleanor is going to, thank you.
So yes, thanks for that lovely introduction, Harold, and for the invitation to be here today. And it's really great to be sharing Otobong's work with everybody, and of course the exhibition that we made together at MIMA. Sadly, to contradict you, Harold, the exhibition has closed. So this is a great moment, we thought, to share the work with some of those audiences who didn't manage to make it to MIMA because it's been such a strange and difficult year. So this is MIMA, Middlesbrough Institute of Modern Art, and it's part of Teesside University. It's in the centre of Middlesbrough, the town. And we also run the MIMA School of Art and Design. And in this building, we house the Middlesbrough collection of modern and contemporary art and craft. And we have really extensive community programmes, engagement programmes and public events, as well as a programme of exhibitions and commissions with contemporary artists. So we're here to talk about the work of Otobong Nkanga and this exhibition in particular, which was, you know, a beautiful and important exhibition to put together. And sadly, the timing meant that it was, although it's been at MIMA for a year, more or less, it was closed for much of that time. So we're happy to share the work in a bit more depth today. And Otobong's going to talk through in detail a selection of the works, and then we'll open up for a conversation. So we'd really like to hear your questions on particular pieces or Otobong's broader practice and approach. At MIMA, we've all been fans of Otobong for quite some time, so it's been brilliant to have an opportunity to work together. We've, you know, followed the work for many years in different contexts and seen how it really deals head on with some of the most important issues and topics that we face as humans today. So one of the things that I love about Otobong's work is that it always brings a proposition or a proposal. And so it chimes, and there are many synergies with both the approaches of MIMA as an organization that thinks, you know, intensively about the role of art and the way that it can be used to create dialogue, debate, but also social change. And also, importantly, we feel that the work really connects with the social and industrial histories and the ecological environment of the Tees Valley, which has gone through many rapid changes and has been a real centre for international trade, but also extraction and production through heavy industry. So it was with great pleasure that we were able to put this exhibition together with Otobong, and of course in collaboration with Tate St Ives and the director of Tate St Ives, Anne Barlow. I will stop sharing screen here and pass to Otobong, who will now talk us through some of the works featured in the exhibition, and then we'll open up for some questions. So over to you, Otobong. Hopefully I've stopped sharing screen now.
Hello, thank you so much, Eleanor. I hope everyone can see me. And also thank you so much, Harold, for this introduction. It's been really a great pleasure working with Anne Barlow, Tate St Ives, and also with the team from MIMA, with Eleanor, Helen, and it's just a pity that the exhibition was lasted this long, but could only open on the 22nd of September and then had to shut down again in October. So there are just very few people that could see the show. But I'm very honored to be asked here to talk from Leeds. And I think it's a good moment to be able to talk about certain works. And I've picked about 3 to 4 works to be able to talk about. And I started from a point, or from a place of photography, and also from the idea of seeing and being able to experience a place and what that place can tell you of the present, of the past, and of the future. So I'm going to share my screen, and yeah, let's go for it. Okay, so the name of the exhibition was called From Where I Stand. And like I talked about just now, it was really thinking about a place of what is your position, how do you see things, and from the position you are in, what are you seeing, what are you experiencing, and what is your position? And I thought it was a good way to be able to enter into a place like Cornwall and to bring in works that were from other places, but also echoes to that environment, which has been very much a mining environment. And so what I would like to start with and to talk about here is to go to a place called Tsumeb, which is in Namibia. And when I started working on the works like In Pursuit of Bling, or in relation to minerals, in relation to places of extraction, notion of shine, places that are obscured, one of the things that I was interested in and I was looking at in 2013 was the Tsumeb mine, was looking at Namibia, which is one of the mining zones, or the early mining zones in the early 20th century. But we also have to understand that if we go to Cornwall, we also know that Cornwall was one of the places of advanced mining by the late 19th century. And a lot of the people from Cornwall moved to other parts of the world, and that knowledge of mining was then exported to the States, to America, to Australia, to different parts of the world. So it was a time, of course, of industrial development, and minerals and materials were needed. And Sumeb was one of those mines that would have so much minerals and ores. And I was interested in it because of when I was in Germany in 2013, I started looking into that notion of mining, into what it means to be able to extract from a place. And I went to the collection, the Naturkunde Museum collection, and I fell on a stone, which was an azurite or a malachite. And I got to realize that the stones were coming from Sumeb. So my curiosity grew, and I decided that I would want to go to Sumeb to be able to see what has happened to the mine, what are the residues, how has it impacted the economy there. There were many questions that I had. I visited the mines, and this was what I found. I found this empty hole, and we can see it here, and also the residues of the space itself. Everything had stopped, and it was just a big hole in the ground. And I started thinking of what it meant to have a hole, let's say, on the skin, or if something has a scar on the landscape. And I decided that while I was there, I would actually perform for this hole. I would perform for this landscape. I took the minerals from the grounds, things that were remaining. So if you look at my head, I have stones on my head and I carry that on my head. And they are mainly stones that still have malachites in them, azurites, different minerals. And I would sing and to the landscape, I would sing and ask for appeasement and ask for forgiveness. And I would name all the minerals that are connected to this land. Because of course, a lot of the minerals were renamed, given names of the people that were studying them, or of places, or like one of them was called Scotlandit. Another one is Biotit. They're all these names that are given to the minerals, which actually have their own names locally. I would go very early in the morning before the sun would rise and perform till the sun comes up. But at the same time, within this landscape, behind the scenes, and that's why it's so, for me, very interesting to talk about what is obscured, what we do not see. And to be able to find the smelter, you have to really go behind everything and then get to a point where you see the smelter from far. So the smelter is actually melting copper that is brought in from places like Bulgaria, brought in through Windhoek into Namibia. And then the arsenic is taken out of the copper. And then we have the copper that is then taken out of Namibia. So there are very few places in the world where the arsenic can be taken out of the copper, because it's quite poisonous. And this is what, going through the landscape, what you're breathing. And for me, I took a lot of photographs that were relating to things that were not visible or things that were not tangible. But the thought of this kinds of dust, of the slag, moving through the landscape, you can imagine what that does to the lungs, to the body. And I realized that a lot of people were also spitting and coughing in this area. And even when I was there, I started having irritations in my throat. So for me, it's very interesting to really think about the holes that we make. But one of the things that also made me reflect in that landscape were the anthills. And there are just so many anthills as you're driving through the landscape. Going up north in Namibia to the Etosha springs, to different areas in Namibia. But I started reflecting on that idea of the holes itself and what that hole meant in relation to the constructions and the positive, which is the objects that we hold, the things that are in our hands, the buildings that we build, the amount of glass that we use. And that correlation of the ants actually digging out earth and creating levels and tunnels underneath the ground. And what you see is the positive of the hole underneath. And that brought me back to the mining systems of the deeper the hole the mine is, you can imagine the higher the structures that we build, and all the different holes in the world are actually the positives. Like when we think of skyscrapers in Dubai or in New York, what does that mean in relation to places that have been holed out? What does that mean in relation to people that are living within this holed out spaces? And how does that affect and infect the places that people live in? So these were the thoughts that started brewing from moving through the landscape, doing this field work, reflecting as you're moving through the spaces, and relating that to different kinds of bodies, the water bodies, tree bodies, human beings, animals, insects, and sky, weather, wind, breathing pipes. So all this started making sense in understanding a bit more what it meant to be in a place that is constantly under, under threat, or that is constantly being scarred, that is constantly being burned, that is constantly being extracted from. The way I work with photography sometimes is that I enjoy, or not enjoy, I try to find the way with my photographic works that relates to the way I use them. So a lot of those photographs that you've seen, I made this 2 stand posts, and where people can actually turn the plates and see the images. So these were my first images that allowed me to think through the work. And most times I don't show them as photographic works on a wall. I have them on my computer, or I print them in my studio to look at. But most times I go through them on my computer. So it made sense to be able to make something that you could actually flip through and look at the images, and more like a kind of panel. And so it's more or less a place where you can reflect, stand and turn, look, and there's a kind of sequence to that in relation to holes, mined places, residues, collections of museums, specimens, the relationship of the body within these kinds of spaces. And there were 2 stands. One looked at also a lot of the ruins, buildings that were left behind, that do not have a function anymore, that are left as residues or debris, ruins, vestiges in the spaces. And if you live with ruins, what does that do to the way you think? If you live in a place where things have been broken down or not functioning, or the economy has been totally arrested, how does that affect the way of like working within that space or regenerating that space? And I think when I visited places like Usakos or the Sumet mines or Kan mines, you actually see how that has affected the landscape and how that has affected the way things could have developed within that space. But it also shows how things are left in a way of of waiting, of dormancy. And what was also interesting in relation to the Sumet mines was that I met with one of the directors, the last director of the mine, and he talked about dormancy, how they're waiting for new technologies so that when the new technologies come, they can actually restart mining again, because they've dug so deep now, and that's the limit of what the technology could do or can do for now. So that idea of also dormancy, and how a place can be dormant, but that doesn't mean that the ruin cannot be exploited and later on cannot be shifted into another place of consuming it or extracting from it. So I picked the second work I'm going to talk about is Sumet fragments. So I'm showing you a view of how it was installed in Mima. And we have this table. There's 6 tables that contain elements that I took from Sumet. And that's why I call it Sumet, which is the mines. So on the table, there's the video that I made with the last director of the mine, who talks about the dormancy of the mine and the possibility of the future of that mine. And then there is the table with the light box, which has about 15 images printed on plexiglass. And you can see images from the archives from 1904 to 1930s to 1970s. And mixed with that are photographs that I took of the same location. What is interesting, you also see within those images the protest of the people when they were well paid. You see also the housing that was built around the mines so that the people would work specifically and mainly for the mines. You would see different histories that are connected to the social aspect of the mines, but also to the minerals that are taken out, the ingots that were made. And so here are some of the images. And this is an image that is printed on stone. And it's an image of the residues of the slag coming from the smelters. So you can imagine such a big landscape covered with black slag slowly building up in the landscape. And this is the residues of the copper that is actually smelted and before being taken out again from Namibia. So I collected different fragments and elements from Sumet itself and created this work that talks about the residues of this place, either through material, through imagery, through narrative storytelling, and through fragments that are being left in different places. So on one of the tables that I haven't shown are also minerals that I picked from the spot. So the white structure here that you see here, that is the elements of malachite, azurites that were picked there and then put on the table as part of the fragments of the space. So the next work I would like to talk about is solid maneuvers. Solid maneuvers was also done in the time when I made Sumet fragments, but it came from that idea of building from the whole and what the whole creates as a positive. And when I think of, the metal sheets we have, the glass structures that we have, the phones, the plastic pens and pens, everything comes from that underneath the ground as petroleum products, but also as products coming from minerals, coming from ores, coming from granite, all kinds of elements. And I was thinking, how can we think about a monument, and what is the monument? Is the monument the things that we have and the things that we build? or is the monument the thing that is actually disappearing, that is the ruins, the vestiges that are found in certain places? So I worked with the students and participants of the Städteschule in Frankfurt. I was a guest professor there. And we started thinking about what could be a monument. And so there are different ways of thinking about that within the German language, a Mahnmal, the way of thinking in relation to monument as something that is connected to history and which we should not repeat again, in which we should not forget about. The monument as something that we make, that becomes a structure in a place. But I was interested in the ones that we do not make, or we make and destroy, or the ones that might not be there in the future and can only be there as a reference, but not as something that you will live with. So when we think of extinctions of certain animals, certain plants, we also have to think of lands that are gutted out and what that does to a place. And that is actually a remembrance, or something we should look and see and constantly remember what that does and what that can be in the future. So this work, Solid Maneuvers, was made in collaboration, or let's say with the project, while working with the students. And this is just the exhibition view. And so the way of thinking of it was to make a sculpture that was connected to the body, and could actually, the body would be performing with the object. So a lot of the students I worked with, the sculpture is shaped around their bodies, and also my body. And we performed the piece in Städteschule. And the way of thinking about the work was that all the elements that are composed of the sculpture are elements taken out from the ground. So you would have vermiculite, salt, makeup, copper, steel, iron, tar, acrylic plates, and these are the layers that you see of the sculpture itself. So I'll go back to the sculpture here. So all the stratas that you see are all these different elements, and in it you have the salts, the heavy sands, the makeup. And I was looking at something that not only as a material, but also something that is connected to our body. So if we think of the envelope, or let's say the structure of our bodies, are made out of minerals, water, and to make us function, we need the magnesium, the copper, we need the calcium, we need all these elements that are very much connected to elements that we have in our landscape. And so the salts or the makeup are things that contain these minerals. Like the makeup, you'd have mica in it that you put on your skin. Powders are also minerals. To the salts that we eat that are also minerals. And the construction materials like the heavy sands. So all this was in a way connected to what we build, what we eat, and what we use on our skins, and also for building. So the performers would then, all the performers would then work in a way that was linked to the gesture of extractions. That means the idea of clamping, the idea of digging, dropping. And we performed a piece that was relating to the first gestures of extractions, which was the hand and the body, but in a way that was also connected to ways the machine has learned from us and the automation of things. So the performance would be more in a way that is more robotic or more mechanical. And I would sing and give the instructions through a song. And they knew within that song the codes that they would have to use to be able to go faster, slower, clamp, drop, pull, fall within the performance. So from there, I took that performance and I was able to use all the different elements to create one piece. So I could then perform the piece by rotating around the sculptural object, and the body will be in the center and the sculpture will be placed around the body. So solid maneuvers has been really thinking, and when you think of manœuvre, the main, the hand, and the œuvre, the work. And so the ways of thinking about the titles, also thinking about what the work is meant to do and how something is rendered solid through the gestures and the performativity of the body and the hand, and how it also renders things loose and breaks them and cracks them through that same gesture. But at the same time, to also think about how our gestures have informed the machine, the artificial intelligence, how technologies, and how that is then accelerated through those kinds of mechanism. So the body slowly gets a bit redundant in relation to the industry. And so I was thinking a lot about that when making the work, from the places of extraction, the places of labor, ruins, vestiges, and also into the kinds of acceleration that comes with the making and also the expulsion of the body within those places. I don't know how much more time I have, but because I'm lost here, I'm just talking. I can't.
Let's say 5 to 10 minutes, Otobong.
Okay, thank you very much. I can't read anything, so I will talk about Constellation to Appease, which was done in 2019. And this work was specifically made for the sea and to be performed to the sea. So when I visited Cornwall and I went to Tate St. Ives, I think one of the things that really struck me was the sea itself, and also that relationship to mining, relationship to the gateway that allowed for the knowledges of mining to move into the world, but also the place that also buries and hides different people that have fallen along the way, that have died, and also certain knowledges that never reached to other places, which might have changed the way the constellation of things are. So the sea for me has always been a place of that kind of hidden mystery, the silent graveyard, but also the same place of extreme riches, of nodules, of minerals, of possibilities. And I felt like it's one of the places, apart from the hole in Sumeb, apart from the mountain that you could perform to, it's one of the places of appeasement. And so I made the sculptural work called Constellation to Appease, which is a metallic structure that is taking the kind of polygonal or forms that are related to crystals or to minerals. But within it, it's emptied out. So as I visit the landscape as I visited the landscape in Cornwall, I would collect what the sea has vomited out. So a lot of the plastics, things that kind of pollute that area, and a lot of those things I collected and I connected it into the belly of the sculpture. And in that way, the thought around the sculpture is that the sculpture will always go to only places that are connected to the sea. So it made sense that the sculpture could come to Mima, and now the next place the sculpture will be shown will be in Villa Arson in Nice, and there is the sea. And so each time the object goes to a place, my idea would be that it should visit the sea and there should be a performance for the sea, and the elements from the sea would be collected and put in the sculpture. So as time goes, The sculpture then accumulates and gets all these elements that have been rejected by the sea, but at the same time, there will be a time and a place for appeasement to the sea. So this just showing you the images that of the performance that we did for the sea. So we didn't announce it to anybody. It was mainly for the sea itself. We worked with the bards from Cornwall and also with young performers that were interested in being part of the performance. So Dave, the bard, were able to tell me a lot about the Cornish history and also that relationship to land, to sea, and the music and folkloric stories and sounds that were being played. So they found music that was related to the landscape, and we would sing. They would sing, or they would play the instruments to the sea, and we had moments to be with the sea and to appease the sea. And later on, the works were brought back into the space in the gallery and was hung there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Otobong.
I tried to go very fast.
Yeah, you covered a lot of ground and brought together a collection of works that have so many fascinating themes, also for, you know, how we deal with the last year and the interconnectedness of things that I think has become apparent to everybody during this time of the of COVID and the crisis around it as well, and as that unfolds globally. So it's fascinating to hear your work as we think about that global context too. So I just wanted to start off with a couple of questions whilst people are kind of, you know, absorbing all of those brilliant images and words that you've shared. And it would be interesting, I think, to start off with that question of appeasement, the offerings, the repair, and that performative strand that runs through so many of your works. Where does that concept come from? How did you land on that as a way of working with the world and with its materials?
I don't know if I think of it as a concept or anything like that. I don't normally bother with all those things, but I think when you feel pain and when you feel like you're in a specific place and you can feel the space, you've been there for a while, you start getting an emotional feeling in which you are heightened, you're aware of. It can trigger a lot of things. It's about listening, and also it's about being within the space and seeing, what can I do? What is the immediate thing I can do? And sometimes the immediate thing one can do, it's just to be with, to acknowledge that this is here and this is happening, and to acknowledge it with someone else, to acknowledge it with a tree, to acknowledge it with water, to acknowledge it with, and then I think that's just the performance is just the first part of acknowledgement. And apart from that acknowledgement is also a personal approach to apologies, and to asking for forgiveness, to they're just different ways of approaching. And I think that also relates to the way that we can also deal with each other. That, you know, if someone is going through a specific kind of trauma or or you see an action that is taking place that is so devastating, what do you do about it? Do you walk away? Do you just say, okay, I'm here with you, I see you, I acknowledge you, which is already a very big step. And then from there, there could be a place for an appeasement, where things can be worked out, and we find a way of slowly finding peace with it, you know. So I think it's just been in relation to visiting places, seeing the struggle, the change, how things affect in love, also in pain, and what that means in relation to care of that space. So it's just my first approach, because I'm not living there. I'm only visiting. And if I'm visiting, what can I do as a starting point?
Thank you. I think a connected question then would be about the use of your own and other people's and images of bodies in your work. And you talked about how this works with solid maneuvers, and the connection also in many of your works between interacting with minerals and ores, ingesting, and recognizing that the materials that you work with are also physically a part of our own bodies. Mm. So I was wondering, in relation to that, if you could talk a little bit about the bodies then that appear in your tapestries and your paintings, which are often have a kind of these mechanized elements. They seem to have a relationship with the performances, but they are maybe a more abstracted or a slightly different version of the body.
Yeah, I'm very much in, how to say, the notion of performance is something that for me has been very much from my childhood, and that what it means, or what, my mom, I think, constantly made us aware what it meant to act on or to do something, and to be very aware of what that impact can be. So I think that relationship to performance, or performing with others, or also relating to that with the drawings or the tapestries. I think with the drawings, it's very much connected to gestures. And when I try to show the hands in action, that's why they might have this kind of like mechanical feeling, because I just feel that we are kind of mechanical. The body, if well oiled, works well, and when it's not, it then becomes rusty. And you also see, as you get older, it's not as flexible. As I can't do my bends anymore and certain things. So you really have to work it, and you have to oil it constantly. So I always think of it as a machine. As a machine that has its limits of functionality. And I think that's what also brings that the industry saw the limits of the body, to be able to create automated bodies, in which those bodies can go even faster than ours, and can be oiled immediately, can be dismantled and replaced. And so I always think of it in that kind of relation, and most of it is it's being performed, it's being constantly in action. And so I'm always thinking of that relationship to performance, even within the drawings, within the installation, how people would walk around things, how you would see, and also when working with performers, what that means in relation to labor. And yeah, so these are different thoughts. I don't know if I answered the question, but my brain is like
firing up. Just one final question from me before we come to audience questions, because I can see there are a few coming in, which is great. So I know that there will be artists and also students in the room, and I think it would be really interesting to hear a bit about the hows of your work. So you work in many different contexts, and as we've seen, across so many different materials and media. How and where do you actually make work, Otobong?
I make work in many places. My studio is very small. I think you witnessed that, Eleanor. I work at home. I have my studio in the ground floor, and I work with my husband. So he works a lot with the administrative things and logistics, and I try to do a lot of the creative parts and partly logistics too. A lot of times when I have a big project, I work with teams of people. I work with certain groups of people. For example, with Landversation project, I work with a project manager. She lives in Brazil, and she was the first person I worked with, and she was at the Sao Paulo Bienal, and she worked on my project. And later on, I asked her if she could be the one to take care of Landversation wherever we show that in the world. And then there's some other people I work with, like with Carve to Flow project. Then I worked with a team that I set up in Athens, and we still work together till today. And so they're just different teams of people I'm working with. And then for making sculptural works, I work a lot with engineers and also architects, because some of the works really need a weight and a balance, and to make also certain kind of technical approaches to them that I understand it, but I do not have the machineries to do that. So there, and for the textile, I've been working for 10 years with the Textile Museum in Tilburg. And so there are groups of people that I've been working for about 10, 15 years. And they do their own work, and we only work together when a project comes up, but we keep in touch, and we grow together in different ways. So it's just a different model of working. I don't really enjoy having like a big studio where you have to then produce because you have to maintain people within that setting. But I believe that with the people I work with, they can do the things they love, and in between come to work with me on a project. Yeah.
I think this way of thinking about these networks also has a relationship with the ideas in your work, the form and the ideas connect.
Yes.
Okay, so I think at this point, Harold, we could open up for questions. I'm happy to take them, or for you to join, whatever you prefer.
Oh, hi. Thanks for the conversation so far. Again, yeah, just to encourage people to post your questions in the Q&A. We do have a question from Claire, and she says, "Thank you so much for a really great talk, Otobong. Could you say more about how the objects that you make around the body or in response to it relate to performance? How objects and performance operate or act together, maybe," she says.
Okay. I think there isn't really, for me, the objects that we make are objects that are meant to help us in a way to be able to exist within the spaces we exist in. So a lot of the objects are made for our pleasure, for our eyes to enjoy, for our hands to hold, for our bodies to lie on, so I'm always looking at things in that perspective, that it's not just there for being there. It's there because it has a specific function in relation to our minds, our soul, in relation to our skin, in relation to the things that we want, or we want to improve or destroy. So objects are not that innocent in a way. They are, they have a specific purpose. So when I'm thinking of that in relation to performances, or those are things that I think of. If I'm making solid maneuvers, I think of it as an object that reflects on architecture, that reflects on topography. So I'm putting together a topographic map in relation to objects, in relation to the emptied mountain, in relation to the grinded, crumbling minerals, in relation to holes. So these are all the kind of key words that will be in relation to that object. At the end of the day, I have these key words that work with the object, but also work with a performer. And so if I'm thinking of the whole, what does that mean in relation to gesture? And is the object the thing that allows us to connect both thoughts together? And with that, the gesture of the hand collects the object and resonates in a specific way through the gestures that it makes. And that gesture will remind us of something, will remind us of maybe a machine that takes up something, drops it in a corner. And there are specific kinds of codes that we all know. We all know that the hand holds something. We all have that gesture, And even if you do not have hands, when you have to lift something, you know that you have to maybe lift it in a specific way. We know that. So it's embedded in our history as humans, right? And so for me, I'm interested in those kinds of very normal, banal gestures and things that we do. But if you connect it with a specific object, then it starts adding another story to it. Then by the time you accumulate another thing, you start adding layers of narratives to it. But the base is that we all know what water is. We all know what a hand is. We all know. But with something else creates a narrative, creates the story, creates the impact, yeah.
Brilliant, thank you. We have another question, which relates to the importance of song and voice in your work, particularly in relation to solid maneuvers. Just wondered if you could talk a bit more about that.
Yeah. I I remember, I think one of the things that I do remember from my childhood has always been when we had to work, because we lived in Nigeria, my mom, and she would put us in the kitchen, and cooking African meals has always been intense, because you have to, you get the vegetable by the time you wash out the sand, and then you have to chop it, and there's so many ingredients. You learn how to, so it takes almost 4 hours to prepare a meal. And those 4 hours were filled with music or singing. And so I've always connected that notion of singing to working, to making. And it kind of lets things or time pass in a very fast way. But I come from a place where also in my family, we sang a lot. And we also went to, like, when you go to the mass or church, you also sang. Music was always something that was connected to everything that you did. But being an artist, for me, it's always been something that I made a clear decision either to become a singer, a musician, or to be an artist. And at one point in time, I thought that the singing made sense within the artistic work. And then within that, I think singing or the voice has a way of penetrating in which an object does not, in which a sculpture or visual work does not. And I found out that in some of the works that I had to do, the voice was very important, because you could really put through an emotion. And there is no hiding of the emotion when you sing. You can't, it's one of the most, how do you say, transparent material to use to express emotion, to express the feelings you have. And the voice, I feel, does not lie in that way. So with the performance, like with some solid maneuvers, um, I the way of really thinking of that was also to create something that, while there is labor, that there is a voice that is soothing. Within that voice that is soothing is the voice that also gives certain keys, tones, and order. And within that, it allowed also for a certain kind of mechanism of the body to work. So if you want to create a certain rhythm, you can do that through the voice, like, and then the body can start moving with it. And then you can really start accelerating, and you'll see that the body actually accelerates with the sound. And then you can slow it down. So for me, it's like a score without it being a score. It's a score, but I didn't want a direct score, like, now lift your hands, go to the left, but just use that as a way to make a score.
Fantastic. I know we are sadly running out of time. So if there are any other questions, maybe we might have time for one more. There was a really lovely comment from Fiona Kelly, who's running back to work. She says, "You're an absolute inspiration. Your subject matter is rigorous, research, poetic outputs are aspirational, and it was a pleasure to hear you speak. So it's a really lovely comment, which I totally concur with. Yeah, I mean, maybe I can indulge a little bit in terms of
Please, Harold.
not necessarily asking a question, but a sort of comment. I mean, I think one of the things that I'm sort of really drawn to in your work is its sensuality, in the sense of a kind of a multi-sensory intelligence. And obviously there's a kind of a sort of vocabulary of materials that you talk to, and this kind of sort of synergy between the sort of the body of the land, bodies of water, bodies of material, and the engagement with the body. There was sorry, this is less of a question, but more of a little anecdote. But I mean, I think I saw a tape video where you were talking about experience of going to school in Lagos and picking up this material. I can't quite remember what the material was.
Micah.
Yes, that's it. Yeah, could you just maybe, I don't know if that is an anecdote that's appropriate to bring up, but it opened up so much for me when I heard that.
Yeah, I just as a kid, you know, you play with things. We would work with hibiscus leaves and cook and do all kinds of things because we were most of the time outdoors. I think that has changed a lot today because of the way things are. But my mom would just leave us outdoors and we would work. So when going to school, we walked to school. And in those days, I think you could just easily find mica on the road. And mica is this phyllosilicate that is a thin sheet that is kind of clustered together, and it reflects in the light. So when the light shines on it, it really reflects. And I remember I was telling in that video about in those days of like glam, you know, like chic glam of Diana Ross and Bonnie M and all these people, and you would have this kind of glitter, constant, you know, the light was made as glitter. And that was the 80s. And so when you see something, you're walking on the ground, for me, that was like my moment of escape. I'll be seeing it glittering and I imagine myself like being Diana Ross, and I'll take it and rub it on my skin. And that was just ways of like projecting or maybe kind of like connecting with my brothers and sisters in the States, right? Or elsewhere in the world, but I never thought of it as that diasporic kind of experience of the other world that is reflecting back on me. And then I'm looking down on this mineral that makes me project into the other world. So that interconnection was there through the material. And so I would put it on my body and walk to school and be in an imaginary world of stardom and fame with Diana Ross. But later, when I encountered that mineral elsewhere, it was in Morocco. It wasn't anymore about that. We have to see that I was around 6 years old, 5 years old when all this was happening, right? So when I encountered it later on in my in my 30s, then it was a question was, what is this? I've seen you before, and that's in my childhood. But now, what is this? And that curiosity brought me into a place of like asking in the souk, and the guy said, oh, it's to chase away spirits. So there's something about the light and something about reflection that is linked to spirituality, but is also linked to the material, mundane side of it, but also linked to the kinds of reflection on the skin, which we use mica on the skin. And a lot of the mineral makeup was to reflect so you don't see the lines on the face. So one is to reflect spirits in the spiritual world, and the other one is to reflect an image of you know, non-reality, because you have lines, but it reflects light so you don't see it. And the other one is to protect and keep the heat in. So there are all these things about reflection and light that brought me to the place of thinking around the notion of shine in a landscape and what that means to reflect the light and what it means to hide. And it brought me to the work that was, you know, in pursuit of bling and thinking of hollowed out spaces where the lights don't shine.
Fantastic. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So I think we've sort of come to the end of time, sadly. Before I say thanks, just to give out a little notice, we will have a BSL, British Sign Language version of today's talk that will be released when the talk is available online. So just to let everyone know. Thank you so much, Otobong, Eleanor, for really insightful and wondrous conversation. I think I was so delirious and excited that I was reconjuring the exhibition. So, but thank you so much. I also should thank some of the team from MEMA, so Helen Welford in particular, Sarah Brown from Leeds Art Gallery, Simon Morris from Leeds Beckett, and Stuart Bannister, and a big thank you to Will Simpson for helping to facilitate and support this whole session today. Also thank you to everyone that's joined us today. Have a good rest of the day. Thank you.
And I hope you'll come and see us at MEMA soon.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Otobong. Thank you, Harold.
Thank you so much for the invitation. It's been really a pleasure. Thank you.